Hey, what's up, guys? It's Nathan back with another video for you today. The next episode of Power Surge, our 2025 NFL Power Ranking series. And today we're going to be discussing the 29th ranked Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, I think this is probably going to be the first team that I'm going to be a lot lower on than probably what consensus is. Um, so I'm definitely kind of expecting to hear some flack, but please go ahead and hear me out. I'm going to understand why I am so low on this Jaguars team. Let's just go ahead and get straight into it. So, first of all, we're going to start off by talking about their 2024 season. In order to know where we're going, I do think it's very important to contextualize the 2024 season so we can understand why we're in the position that we're in the first place. So, last year they went 4-13 overall while going 9-7-1 against the spread. So, they were not winning a whole lot of games, but there was a lot of games that they were pretty close in. Now, the reason I think that they didn't end up converting more of those games into wins ultimately comes down to the quarterback play and the coaching. So we'll kind of dive into that in just a little bit more specifically. But their offense was 26th in points per game and 25th in yards per game. So that's part of the reason they struggled. They had almost a bottom five offense overall. Now you may be sitting here and saying, but hey, Trevor Lawrence missed half the season, which is true. He only played 9 of this team's 17 games, so he did miss 8 games. However, in the games that he did play, they went 2-7. So as much as you could chalk it up to Trevor missed time, even when he was there, the Jaguars still were not very good and still were not winning games. The two wins that they had when Trevor Lawrence was a starting quarterback were the Patriots and the Colts. The Patriots had the fourth overall pick, and the Colts also missed the playoffs. So, not like they were necessarily high profile wins. When Mac Jones came in, he had 2 wins, which is the same amount that Trevor Lawrence had on the season. And those 2 wins, granted, were over the first overall pick Titans. So, not like they were necessarily high profile wins in their own regard. But I think that this team's record against the spread might be more indicative that maybe Trevor Lawrence isn't as good of a quarterback as maybe people thought. I'll let you digest that. And we'll kind of talk about this defense as well, because this defense really struggled too. They were 28th in points per game and 31st in yards per game. So not only were they not getting the ball in the end zone, they were allowing teams to get the ball in the end zone. So if you're not stopping anybody and you're not scoring yourself, very, very difficult to win football games. And so ultimately, that is what cost Doug Peterson his job, as that last year the Jaguars were just plain and simple not a very good team. So now let's go ahead and talk about their offseason and kind of what they did to fix the poor season that they had. So first of all, as I said, they fired Doug Peterson and they brought in Liam Cohen to be their new head coach, as well as firing Trent Baalke. So they decided to kind of shift up the leadership that they had. And I do think this is a good hire. I do think it's a fun hire. However, I do still want to be cautious and optimistic. I know this is kind of his first big chance to really call plays. At first he was under Sean McVay, and then he was with Dave Canales. So this is his first chance of being a head coach. Last season was his first year calling plays. So I do want to kind of pump the brakes and say, hold on, there's still a lot to learn as a play caller and, still being a leader in the front man of the organization. So I do think this is a smarter hire as opposed to going for kind of a retread, offensive or defensive coordinator who's failed before, kind of like what Doug Peterson was. So I do think taking a swing at upside is a good decision, but still, I think you need to pump the brakes and kind of not just assume that he's going to come in and make this offense automatically better. In the quarterback room, they just swapped Nick Mullins for Mac Jones as their backup quarterback. If you're getting to play Nick Mullins, then your season's probably over. The skill positions, they did make a decent amount of change. So they say goodbye to D'Ernest Johnson, Luke Farrell, and Gabe Davis, which are not super significant losses. None of them were, huge contributors for this team. But I do think Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk are going to be some good losses. They are really good players who I think were productive in Jaguars uniforms. So I do think losing them is going to hurt this team. And so they decided to kind of fix or replace those guys with Michelle Tootin, Johnny Munt, Hunter Long, Diami Brown, and then spending their first round pick on the superstar that is Travis Hunter. So I do think if Travis Hunter can hit, it will improve their skill positions. However, I do think losing Evan Ingram is going to hurt this team. He was a safety blanket for Trevor Lawrence and was a good receiving option for them. But you're hoping that Travis Hunter could be elite as a playmaker, which Evan Ingram wasn't. So if you're able to get rid of Evan Ingram and have Travis Hunter turn into elite wide receiver, then you're going to be okay with it. You also got to take in mind to his defensive capabilities as well, but we'll get more into that a little bit down the line. The offensive line, however, I am worried about because they're saying goodbye to Brandon Scherf, Mitch Morse, and Cam Robinson, who are three solid offensive linemen. Even though a few of them are getting up there in age, I still think they're better than who they brought in, and Patrick McCarry, Robert Hainsey, and White Milan. So your skill positions not guaranteed to be better. Your offensive line definitely got worse. And then your coaching is still kind of, we still need to wait and see how he's going to be as a head coach. So overall, I'm not sure if this offense, which struggled last year, really got much better. So now as we transition to kind of the offseason from the defensive perspective, as we said, this was a bottom 5 unit in the league last year. And then you look at what they brought in: Dennis Gardick, rotational edge player; Emmanuel Ogba, rotational edge player; Dwayne Smoot, rotational edge player. I don't really know if any of those guys are going to help your defensive line. They spend a late round pick on Jack Kaiser, not expecting a whole lot from him because they already have two solid linebackers. They bring Jordan Lewis, Eric Murray, and Caleb Ransaw in the secondary. So at least Jordan Lewis and Eric Murray should help. But then again, you're also now relying on Travis Hunter in your secondary. So we've never seen a player play on both sides of the ball before in the NFL. I know people want to say that he could be the Shohei Ohtani of the NFL, but pitching and having 4 plate appearances a game is a lot different than having to try to tackle Derrick Henry. It's just not the same. So I think relying on Travis Hunter to completely improve and fix 2 different positions position groups on your team, I do think is a big risk to take, especially when he is a slender player. He is going to be playing a lot. We don't know if that really is possible in the NFL. Even Devontae Adams has recently just come out and said he doesn't think it's possible. I believe him. The physicality of the NFL is like, that's a lot of mileage to put on your body. He seems like a great kid. He's going to work hard and he does what he can, to keep himself healthy. So I don't think it's going to be his fault, but it's grown men. You're not playing in the Big 12 anymore. Kansas and Texas Tech don't have the same defense like the Vikings, Lions do. The Baltimore Ravens, Derrick Henry stiff arms you. It's not like some Baylor running back, you know what I mean? So there is some concern that I think that their offseason, I think they got worse on their offensive line and didn't really improve. I think they got too flashy with the Travis Hunter and some other selections. So as I said, when we talk about their offseason, kind of just recapping everything, the coaching should improve the team. However, you are entirely relying on Liam Cohen and Travis Hunter to fix this team. They had the 5th overall pick. That is 2 guys. Granted, you can kind of count Travis Hunter as 3, but if he gets injured, now that means you have 2 holes on your team instead of 1. So huge risk. You're putting a lot of weight on 2 guys' shoulders to completely turn around your franchise. So I think in year 1, I think that's ultimately going to hurt the Jacksonville Jaguars. And as I said, this is essentially the same core team that struggled last year. As I said, their defense is essentially the same. The offense is essentially the same. This team just had a top 5 pick, and we're keeping the roster mostly the same and just expecting it better because of Liam Cohen. I think we need to pump the brakes on this team because of that. So as I said, did they get better? I don't know. I think their general manager got too flashy and didn't do the necessary investments of the offensive line, defensive line, or the secondary. I think he focused too much on the fun positions and not kind of the meat and potatoes of this roster. So overall, I'm really not sure if this offense or this team in general got better. So now as we talk about this offense in more specific details, we'll start off with Trevor Lawrence. Listen, I think he's overrated. I think he is around the 20th best quarterback in the league. Processing in between the ears, I don't think he's figured out. He has definite accuracy concerns, and he has bad consistency issues. Now, I know some people are going to point to some of these ridiculous throws he makes where the wide receiver drops it, and everybody wants to blame it on the wide receiver. But here's the thing. So in life, and especially in the quarterback position, you become your worst traits. And so while Trevor Lawrence does flash these moments where he's able to make these incredible throws, It's the more simple, mundane plays that he struggles with, and that's ultimately what type of quarterback you become. I don't want you to be able to every now and then throw this absolute dot through double coverage and have a great pass. I want you to consistently make the right read on time, and you'll notice there's times when you watch where he'll be late to a like simple check down like a stick route, or he'll throw it at the tight end's feet to where he's not able to make a play. It's these small micro inaccuracies is what hurts this team. I don't want you to be able to hit the barn door or the keyhole in the lock of a barn door one time out of 10 and then miss simple throws trying to hit the side of it 9 times out of 10. So overall, I do think he has the ability to have these crazy throws, but on the down to down consistency aspect of it, I do not trust Trevor Lawrence. And because of that, I do think he is simply overrated. And if he was not drafted with the first overall pick and hadn't been this prodigy since he was 18 years old, I think Trevor Lawrence probably would have already lost his job, if we're being honest. Now, as we talk about this skill group, I do think this is a group that does have some high end potential. However, I do think they're going to fall short of that potential because of Trevor Lawrence and this offensive line. So, Brian Thomas, I think, really did break out last year, is a true stud, and I do think has the potential to grow into kind of a true number one wide receiver. With Trevor Lawrence, though, I do think, and I'll get more into it when we talk about the fantasy aspect, you could see his production just was not quite the same with Trevor Lawrence as quarterback. So I do have some worries that everybody's going to expecting great and high things from him that he's just not going to be able to live up to. Travis Hunter, same thing. We have not seen somebody play both sides of the ball before. So I do think he'll come in right away and be a solid wide receiver, but I don't know if he's going to be some super high volume target right off rip. I do think he has the potential to be fantasy relevant and, still a solid player, but definitely not like offensive player of the year capabilities, at least not as a rookie. Diami Brown and Parker Washington are okay as your 3 and 4 wide receiver. Diami Brown hasn't really gotten the chance to play out in Washington, so maybe he'll get a better chance here. But as another kind of secondary outside receiver, I think he'll have a decent season. And Parker Washington is more of your slot type. I don't expect him to play a whole lot if Travis Hunter's out there and playing wide receiver. I think Travis Hunter is probably going to end up being more of your slot wide receiver, almost more of your Chris Godwin, while Brian Thomas may end up kind of being more of a Mike Evans type. Just comparing to kind of Liam Cohen's Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tight end group, you kind of have 3 guys who are kind of tight end twos. I do think Brenton Strange is going to win this job, and I do think he's going to have a solid season for his expectations, but I'm not expecting him to kind of climb into the ranks of like a top 10 tight end. I think he has deficiencies as a blocker and as a receiver, so I think he's going to be okay. I think he's going to be solid. I think he's going to be above average, but definitely not like top 10 tight end capability. And then this running back room is, I think, one of the worst ones in the league. I think Travis Etienne, I think, always had vision problems, and I think because of some of the receptions he was able to have and kind of his ability as a receiving back, I think he got overvalued because he had a decent fantasy season. But he's just not a very good running back. He's got okay speed, not great vision or consistency. So when you pair that with a bad offensive line, I don't know how well he's going to do. Honestly, the same thing can apply for Tank Bigsby. Very, very similar player, less of a receiving threat, but I do think he has the same concerns of speed, vision, and consistency. So maybe you can help that 4th-round pick, Mr. Michelle Tootin, can do something. I think this is going to be kind of a 3-way committee, so I'm really kind of just out on this entire group as a whole. Now, as we talk about this offensive line, it definitely is one of the weaker offensive lines in the league. They do have decent potential for their tackle duo, but the interior group I am worried about. These are all kind of like low-level, base-level starters who don't have great physical upside. And in Robert Hainsey's case, he's getting up there in age, coming off a serious injury. I don't really expect him to be a super good center like he was a few seasons ago. I think if this offensive line is good, it's going to be because of your tackle duo. So Walker Little, former 5-star recruit, has great potential. Unfortunately, he just has never been able to stay injury-free. Had multiple injuries throughout college, like serious injuries. Even the last couple seasons in the NFLs, he's got knocked up and banged up. So I don't think he has this potential anymore to be like a true elite franchise tackle, but at the very least, he can still be a solid, good tackle for your team. And then Anton Harrison came in right away and actually was able to hold his own as a pass blocker right away. So if he's able to develop as a run blocker, he could develop into one of the better right tackles in the league. So if there's any potential for this offensive line, it's going to be on the outsides. Depth-wise, Chuma Adoga, Luke Fordner, White Millum, not really expecting a whole lot from them either. So if you start having injuries, this already bad offensive line, I think, is only going to get worse. Now, as you start talking about the defensive line, I do think this group is going to struggle as well. I do think they're slightly above average, but I do think there's a chance that they could struggle both against the pass or against the run. So first of all, we'll start about Josh Hines-Allen. He is kind of in this tier 2 of edge rushers. So he's a legit number 1 edge rusher, but hasn't quite been able to grab that kind of brass ring and kind of develop into one of the elite edge rushers in the league. However, as I said, he's kind of in that tier 2, kind of right behind those guys. So he's still an excellent player, and if he's the best player in your defensive line, you're definitely still happy about that. Other pieces is where we kind of start getting worried. Trayvon Walker, former first overall pick, hasn't lived up to the hype. Super great athlete, good at stopping the run, but almost like Jadeveon Clowney, hasn't quite figured out in the getting after the quarterback aspect of his job. He is, for all intents and purposes, a solid number 2 edge player. The issue with that is you spent the first overall pick on him. Thanks a lot, Trent Baalke. So I do think he may be able to do a good job of stopping the run, but maybe not getting after the quarterback. And the other 3 guys you have here, Emmanuel Ogbah, Dwayne Smoot, or Dennis Gardick, they're also kind of one or the other, with either decent at stopping the pass or decent at stopping the run, but not both. So I do think there is some worry about your edge group, especially if Josh Hines-Allen goes down. I don't know who's getting after the quarterback. Then when you talk about the interior, Arik Armstead, I think, has seen his best days have passed him. So I do think we're probably not going to be expecting the kind of stud, kind of number 2 interior presence that he's been in his career. I do think he's going to start slowly losing more and more reps. In his career, I definitely think is kind of entering the twilight of it. Devon Hamilton, solid above average tackle, a defensive tackle, but definitely not anything more than that. And Mason Smith, same thing, kind of replacement level. Maybe he can kind of start developing in Arik Armstead's place, but I'm really not expecting a whole lot from the interior group, which is also a pretty thin interior group. So I do think there is some concern that this defensive line could struggle either getting after the quarterback or stopping the run. And then if Josh Hines-Allen does go down, I'm certainly worried about this defense overall. I think the one thing about this defense you don't have to worry about is this linebacker pair. Foye said Aluakan and Devin Lloyd are both 2 excellent linebackers. This is one of the better linebacking rooms in the league because Ventrell Miller and Chad Muma, having those guys to come off the bench or in case of injury, is a pretty good group to have. Miller's kind of more of the athlete. Muma is less of an athlete, but definitely a pretty smart guy. So between those 4 linebackers, there's absolutely nothing to worry about for this team. They're going to help, not really be a liability for you. The secondary is kind of where I start getting worried. So Tyson Campbell is a solid cornerback, but you probably don't want him to be your best cornerback. He's a decent man corner. I think he's going to be an okay job. But am I expecting him to kind of be, tier 1, tier 2 of guys? No, he's kind of just not that player, like maybe we thought it could have been a couple seasons ago. So as your number 1 corner, he is fine. I still think you'd prefer him to kind of be your second best defensive back in your secondary. So the hope is that Travis Hunter could maybe be that. But starting off, he's playing more wide receiver than he is corner. And as I said, the durability aspect of playing in NFL versus the Big 12 is also different. So if he goes down, then you're really going to start having worries. Because Jordan Lewis is a good corner, but he is strictly a slot corner. So he is, a decent, one of the top half kind of slot corners in the league. But Monteric Brown and Jurian Jones are kind of your backup options to play outside, and I don't really expect a whole lot from them either. So you kind of do need Travis Hunter to stay healthy. Otherwise, I do think the secondary is going to be able to start getting picked apart, especially when your safety group is not spectacular. Eric Murray is probably your best safety here, and he's nothing but a kind of just an average okay safety at best. And then Darnell Savage and Antonio Johnson, both could be liabilities at certain points. I don't know if they're guys you really want to be starting. And Andrew Wingard's kind of been a decent kind of a third safety for this team for a couple of seasons of now, but I don't know if I really want him playing every down. So I really don't think this secondary is guaranteed to be great. And I do think there's actually some legit concern that it's going to be a bad unit, especially if this defensive line is not able to get after the quarterbacks and these guys have to cover for longer. Then I start getting really scared that this defense could kind of continue being one of the worst defenses in the league. And if I think your offense is going to struggle and your defense is going to be bad, that means not a whole lot of wins. So now I'd like to welcome you to the Fantasy Control Room. This is where we begin discussing all things fantasy. So we're going to start off with Brian Thomas, and I have two different splits for you here. The first half of the season with Trevor Lawrence, Brian Thomas Jr. averaged about 4 catches for about 66 yards and had 5 total touchdowns in 9 games. That averages out to almost 14 fantasy points per game. This would make him a wide receiver 2 for your fantasy roster. When Mac Jones was his quarterback, he had 6.5 catches per game for about 86 yards while having 5 touchdowns in 8 games for a total of about 18.8 fantasy points per game. So as I said, I have concerns about Trevor Lawrence, who he is as a quarterback, and how good of an offense he could support. So that's why when you start discussing Brian Thomas as your wide receiver 8, average draft position of wide receiver 8, I think he's overvalued. As I said, we saw how he performed with Trevor Lawrence, and so I'm worried that if Trevor Lawrence is your starter, which you're expecting him to be healthy, that Brian Thomas is not going to perform at that price tag as your wide receiver 1. So personally, he is someone I'm avoiding. There is also the case that maybe, he just kind of took some time to get going, and then, starting in next season, he'll be able to develop, or maybe Liam Cohen will use him better. Certainly, there is an argument to be made there, so if you think I'm wrong, feel free to draft him. But if you're looking for one of these younger guys to be your wide receiver 1, I'm either targeting Malik Nabers or Ladd McConkey, who I think are better wide receivers, and I think they're honestly going to be on better offenses. So I would rather target those guys to be my wide receiver 1 instead of Brian Thomas, who I think has a great potential to underperform expectations as your wide receiver 1. And now as we talk about the fantasy upside of Travis Hunter, as wide receiver 28, I do think there's fun upside here. So I definitely think he's worth shooting a shot at. However, in this range, I do think there's better value. Ted McMillan, Xavier Worthy, and Deebo Samuel, I do think all have potential to be closer to kind of true wide receiver 1s for their team, or wide receiver 1s for fantasy team. So I would rather target one of those guys who I think is going to get more targets overall than Travis Hunter, who's also going to be splitting time, playing a little bit defense, and he's going to have a lot more mileage and chance of injury than really any other player in the league. Now, as we kind of start talking about some of these other players, Trevor Lawrence is quarterback 21. I think if you're playing a 2 quarterback or a super flex league, he has some value, but in a traditional 10-man with 1 quarterback, definitely not someone I'm even worth considering drafting. Between Etienne, Bigsby, and Tootin, I'm avoiding all 3 players. Great rule of thumb in fantasy football is kind of just avoid committees. At running back, the best way to have fantasy success is through volume. You need to have the volume. You need to be getting the important carries. And if there's 3 guys who could potentially be the lead back any given week, I'm keeping my fingers clear of it. Having that start-sit decision nightmare every single week is just not worth it. And I think the upside of these guys is a low flex end play anyways, so giving yourself that headache is, I just don't think, worth it. I don't think they have any value. Diami Brown, wide receiver 92, he only has value if there's injuries. He screams like week 11, like projected 9.2 points on the waiver wire, and you pick him up if you have an injury or a bye week, but definitely not worth drafting in my opinion. Brenton Strange, however, at tight end 21, I do think he has the upside to be a low-end kind of tight end starter for you. Tight end position overall is weak outside of the top 4 to 5 guys. So as a late round flyer, I definitely think it's a worthy shot to take if you have the spot on your bench for it. So now let's go ahead and talk about their schedule. So their schedule actually is not anything too ridiculous. They open against Carolina, have to go on the road to Cincinnati, play Houston at home, have to go to San Francisco, play KC, play Seattle, play the Rams all at home before they head on bye. I do think this is a rough way to start off. They're the favorites against Carolina and probably should win that game. But Cincinnati, San Francisco, and Kansas City are definitely clear better teams. You think in a divisional game at home against Houston, they should have a chance to win. However, Houston in Jacksonville has had Trevor Lawrence's number, so I think Houston will handily win that one. So I think you're starting off probably 1-4, and I do think Seattle and the Rams both are better teams. I think the Rams will be able to pick apart this defense, and I think Seattle's defense is going to be able to keep this offense in check. So overall, I think we're heading into the bye probably with one win. I think we're 1-6. So not a hot start off for the Jaguars. Coming off a bye, then they have to go to Vegas, to Houston, play the Chargers, and then play the Cardinals. So again, that's another month stretch where I really don't know if they're winning any of those games. So right now we're looking at 1-10, but when they kind of start getting their wins, it's going to be this back half of the schedule. So they get to play Tennessee twice. They get to play the Colts twice. They get to play the Jets, and they have to go to Denver. So I think they're losing Denver and probably splitting the series against Indianapolis. I think they should beat the Jets and win at least one against the Titans. So that right there is going to be 3 of your wins. You're probably getting one early. So I think your floor is probably around 5-12. I think your absolute floor is around 5-12. I don't really expect them to be much worse because, as I said, from week 13 to week 18, they're probably going to rattle off 3 or 4 wins right there as a whole. I think their ceiling is probably closer to 8 wins. If they're able to steal some of these games at home, like against Seattle, against Houston, maybe they could take care of it against the Raiders at Vegas. I do think they have the potential to kind of get to 8 wins, but based on this schedule, I really don't see this being a team that's going to have a winning record. So now as we get to the cover story where we start talking about all thing betting related, let's start with the over-under. I'm definitely leaning the under. At 7.5, as I said, I do think there's a way where they get to 8. However, I'm more confident they're probably going to finish around 5 or 6, so I'm definitely leaning the under there. For the division winner at plus 300, I do think that they are dark horse to win the AFC South. I know I'm saying that and ranking them the 29th team, but I do think the AFC South is the weakest division in football. So, there definitely is a way where they could go 8-9 and find a way to win the division. If you're talking about making the playoffs at plus 170, I'm not betting this. The only way this team is going to make the playoffs is if they win the AFC South. So I'd rather take the plus 300 odds instead of the plus 170 odds. But when it comes to the Super Bowl, there is absolutely no chance they make it or win it. Absolutely zero chance. And as we transition over to kind of some of the player props, Brian Thomas, I am going to lean the under 1,149.5 receiving yards. As I said, I do have some concern for Brian Thomas in this offense with Trevor Lawrence. Granted, he could definitely smash this and make me look like an idiot. I'm personally leaning and betting the under. Brenton Strange, I'm actually going to be going the opposite. I'm going his over. I don't really think he's going to have a whole lot of competition in this tight end room. Johnny Mundt and Hunter Long are kind of backup tight end types, so he should have the opportunity to get plenty of reps out there and hopefully produce at least 500 yards. But then Travis Etienne, as I said, they're going to be in a weird, interesting committee, so I'm leaning his under at 524.5. I think this offensive line is not very good. I don't think he's a very good player. You can combine that with the team I think is going to struggle and be behind a lot of games. I don't know if he's going to have the game script or the ability to hit his over. So I'm going against Travis Etienne there. Now as we talk about the Scorch Report, this is where we start giving our hottest takes of the season. And I guess I'm going to keep dogging on Trevor Lawrence. He's not a very good quarterback. If anything, he is below average. So my take is going to be, it's not even just for this season, it's for the rest of Trevor Lawrence's career. Trevor Lawrence will never win a playoff game again as a Jacksonville Jaguar. You heard it here. I do not believe in him as a player. I think he's overrated. Between him or Derek Carr, I want Derek Carr. I want Sam Darnold. I want Geno Smith. He is kind of like in this tier 4.5 of quarterbacks. Like, I think he's closer to Daniel Jones than he is to Jalen Hurts. I know people are going to think I'm ridiculous for saying that, but he doesn't always pass the eye test for me. Sure, he has this great arm, is capable of making great throws, but Justin Field has a great arm, is capable of making some good throws every now and then. Broken clock can be right twice a day. So, with that being said, Trevor Lawrence is a guy that I'm not backing in any sort of shape or regard. I do not believe in him as a player, and so as I said, he will not win a playoff game again as a Jacksonville Jaguar. That's my take. And so, with that being said, that was my thoughts on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Am I too low? Am I too high? Am I just right? Go ahead and comment down below and let me know what you think. If you like this video, please go ahead and like. That's going to push it out to more NFL fans just like you. And if you want more of this type of content, please go ahead and subscribe. We got 28 more videos to make and about 28 more days before the season starts. So there's going to be a lot of content coming your way the next few weeks. So if you're excited for the NFL season, go ahead and drop a subscribe, and I hope to see you around.